You live side by side, often for many years, making it extremely important to try get along well with your neighbours. So it can become very stressful when arguments arise over dividing fences, overhanging trees, noise, pets and rubbish. Well, to help us find out what the law says when it comes to these issues, we're joined by Jeremy Streten from Streten Masons Lawyers, who's also the author of the Business Legal Life Cycle, just released this month. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to us about this, because it is such a something that can become so stressful if you and your neighbours are arguing about something. Just firstly though, can we just find out, I mean, the law covering these sorts of disputes, though, it's different in every state and territory, isn't it?
Thanks, Bridie. Yeah, that's right. The law is state-based. The general principles are the same, but the specifics of the law are slightly different in every state in Australia.
Just, I guess, so obviously focusing on Queensland law then, firstly fences, are they the #1 area for disputes, dividing fences?
Yes, they are. So dividing fences are along the common boundary of property, and a lot of owners don't want to agree on what they want to put on the dividing fence line, and so they are a massive dispute that does occur on a regular basis.
So what's the rules? If you want to, say, fix a fence or put in a brand new dividing fence, who pays?
Well, the rule is that you need to have a sufficient fence between two properties along a common boundary. If you don't have a sufficient fence, or it needs to be repaired to become a sufficient fence, then each of the parties has to pay equally for the repair or the construction of the new fence.
Aha, so it's 50-50, but I'm guessing that's where the disputes arise, is what constitutes sufficient?
That's right. So a sufficient fence in Queensland is a fence that's between 0.5 metre and 1.8 metres in height, and it is made of the normal materials like wood, chainmail, it could be metal, bricks, hedges, and the main dispute comes up over whether or not what one party wants as a fence is actually sufficient, or whether they should get something more.
Yeah, like one neighbour has a dog or is getting a dog, so they want a high fence. The other one's got a veggie patch on the other side, doesn't want a fence that's going to shadow that. So, I mean, looking at this then, if one neighbour wants a nicer fence, a more expensive fence than the other neighbour, then how does that work? Who pays for that?
The general rule is that if you want a fence that's, say, worth $15,000 and a sufficient fence under the definition in the Act is $10,000, then you have to pay the difference. So your neighbour would pay $5,000 and you would pay $10,000, so that the neighbour isn't put out of pocket just because you want a bigger fence or need a bigger fence because of your circumstances.
And I know when I was chatting to you earlier that pool fences now obviously are a big issue as well, where disputes can arise once a pool, say, goes into one neighbour's backyard.
Absolutely. Pools are heavily regulated, and rightly so, because they are dangerous and things can happen if they're not to small children, for instance, or pets if they're not properly fenced. And so the rules around pool fences also apply to a dividing fence, if that fence is as part of the pool fence. So you need to be careful to make sure that the pool fence, if a dividing fence is a pool fence, that it's sufficient to also meet the legislation regarding pool fences in your state.
So what happens if the neighbour, you've tried to chat to the neighbour about, a new fence along the common boundary, and they don't want anything to do with it. They say they don't want to spend the money on it. They think what's there is fine. How do you approach that?
Well, I mean, obviously the first step is talking to them. If they don't want to agree and you can't make them agree, then under the legislation in Queensland you can serve a fencing notice on them, and that is a document that is a prescribed form. If you Google fencing notice Queensland, you'll find on the Justice Queensland website lots of different forms, and the form specifies why you need a fence or a repair to the fence, what that repair or new fence would look like, and also a quote for the fence. If they don't respond, if your neighbour doesn't respond within 30 days, then either party has another 30 days in which they can bring an application to what in Queensland is called the Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal for an order that a dividing fence be allowed to be put up and that the parties contribute in their respective shares, whether that be 50-50 or a greater share if someone wants something more than a sufficient fence.
Now, to trees, overhanging trees, so I'm guessing this is up there with fences then in what causes angst between neighbours?
Absolutely. People obviously don't want trees hanging over into their property, and people who have trees that do hang over to other people's property often don't want to have them removed. So that is a massive area of dispute as well in this area.
When it comes to overhanging trees?
Absolutely.
So what's the rules? Like if it's, is there a certain height of the tree where you are able to cut branches down, or if it overhangs by a certain amount?
Yes, so the rule is that if it overhangs by 50 centimetres and is under 2.5 metres in height, then you can serve a fencing notice on your neighbour. If they don't come in and remove the overhanging fence within 30 days, then you can remove it yourself and charge them up to $300. But as a general rule, if there is an overhanging branch, you are permitted to remove it and throw the branches back over onto the other side. If it's over 2.5 metres, then you need to serve the notice and come to a resolution about what needs to happen, who's going to pay before you go making any changes, if you want to recover the cost off your neighbour.
And what about, you know, the situation where the roots of a tree in the neighbour's yard are starting to cause damage to your property? What's the sort of rules about that?
Well, the first solution would be to remove the overhanging branches. As far as any damage that's caused, in law we call it a private nuisance. So it's a cause of action that allows you to go and commence proceedings against someone for loss that you suffer. But the problem, as with a lot of these matters, is that it's not really commercially viable to sue your neighbour for a few $100s if your roof is damaged. Because it's just not commercially viable to engage lawyers for that kind of cost. Right,
okay, if there's a lot of debris being dropped onto your gutters, say, and you're having to clean them constantly, or you have to pay the cost of getting the branches cut down, then yeah, you really want to try and mediate and talk it over.
Yeah, you need to. I mean, these people are going to be your neighbour. They're going to be your neighbour for a long time. You want to make sure that you're not having a fight with them because that can escalate badly. And you've seen many instances over the years where people have got into fights where they didn't need to if they just sat down and talked about it.
Yeah, and what are the other sort of issues that come up? Is it noise? Is it pets? Are they the sort of the other ones? What are the rules surrounding noise?
Yeah, so the rules surrounding pets and noise, that's really common sense. So, and again, it's a private nuisance. If someone's making a loud noise, say with a loud party, if there's hoons down your street, if there's a burglar alarm going off, then you should call the police, not 000, that's for emergencies, but ring like the police link numbers and ask them to come and deal with it. If it's just a loud, constant noise, then you should keep a record of what the noise is and ask your local council to investigate it. They have all of the materials and the devices to allow them to measure noise decibel levels, and you could make complaints through them, and they actually have the power to stop someone from making noise. And that's the same with pets. If pets are making a lot of noise, then you can also make a complaint to the animal management department of a council, and they'll come in and assess it. And if the pet is making undue noise, and there's certain powers that they have, depending on which council they are.
But first and foremost, with all of these, your tip would be what? Try talk face to face first?
Go and talk face to face first. If you can't resolve it or you're scared, then is there a third party mediator that another neighbour or a local person that could help resolve it? Thirdly would be to try and go to a counsellor. Local councillors can sometimes help to resolve these, but try and resolve it before you go to court.
Because that's going to be costly and really no one wins then, do they?
That's right. Well, the principle of the thing, which a lot of people pursue these for it only makes lawyers rich. So you need to be commercial about it and make sure you're not spending too much money going after a neighbour just because you're unhappy over a fence, because you have to live with them over a long period of time.
Absolutely. Jeremy, look, fantastic. Thank you so much for taking us through all those rules. That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jeremy Streten there from Streten Masons Lawyers. We've got to take a quick break. There is an auction about to get underway in Camp Hill in Brisbane. We'll be there live in just a moment.